There we go.
See if that works.
Yes, can I reclaim my time, sir?
You've lost no time.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you. It's concerning to me that we've spent almost 5 hours here of this esteemed body, which I am a member of, to discuss tapes of Hillary Clinton when we know that we have a humanitarian issue happening in our country that we need to resolve. But with that being said, President Trump fired Director Comey on May 9, 2017, and on May 10, 2017, Chairman Jason Chaffetz sent a letter to you, sir, asking that you investigate the decision to fire James Comey. Did you receive that letter?
I did.
You separately stated that if circumstances warranted, the OGI will consider including other issues that may arise during the course of the review, and the recommendation to remove Comey indeed warranted some consideration. Am I correct, sir? You said that.
Yeah, if
Okay.
circumstances warrant, we would
Okay,
expand
my
the review.
question to you is, then, did you expand the scope of your review into the 2016 election to encompass the fire of Director Comey?
We did not.
Why didn't you?
For similar reasons to what I mentioned earlier, which is my understanding that it may be the subject of an ongoing special counsel review, that there wasn't a reason for us to make a determination at that point in time.
Did someone direct you not to?
Nobody directed us not to.
Is your office currently investigating the firing of Director Comey?
We have not announced any review regarding that.
I didn't say announcement. Are you currently investigating?
We, as I said a minute ago, if there's a basis for us to look at it, we will assess and look at it. But my understanding is that it is something that the special counsel is reviewing, and I know
that's your
that
sole decision to make.
it is my sole decision to make.
Have you encountered any attempts to interfere with, obstruct, or curtail that investigation?
Zero. No, of my own investigations. This investigation or other work, we've had no interference at all.
Has any entity or individual denied you witnesses or documents that you have requested as a part of your investigation that you have presented to us?
We got access to everything, and as we note here, 2 witnesses did not agree to voluntarily be interviewed by us, and we had no ability to compel them.
Is there, and I will ask you again, is there a role that your office will play in the investigation that does not interfere with Special Counsel Mueller's probe? We have multiple investigations that have happened with the Hillary Clinton emails. Why are you making that sole decision that because there is one investigation that you will not investigate the firing of FBI agent Comey?
As a general matter, Congresswoman, and it's not unique to this matter, as a general matter, when there are ongoing Justice Department investigations, FBI, others, we understand that we don't want to be in the middle of an ongoing investigation, and we defer and wait until the conclusion of that to assess whether there's something for us to review. And the special counsel, as does the Deputy Attorney General and others, understand that under the IG Act, if they see misconduct by Justice Department officials, they're obligated to notify us of that.
So you are stating on the record now that there will be no investigation from your office based on your sole decision of the firing of Director Comey.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying we have not made a decision with regard to the request we received as to whether we should or should not do that.
So how long will that process take for you to make a decision?
In all likelihood, until we understand that there is no other investigation going on of that within the Justice Department, we would wait until that point in time. And obviously that is out
I
of
would
my
like to
control.
ask a question. repeatedly we've heard about the possible obstruction of the election of our current president. And last time I checked, even though the crowd's numbers don't match his statements, he is the president of the United States. So we are investigating whether a person's personal opinion is one that is conduct that we are finding to be, as far as employment, because it was a government phone, is that the issue that is the core of this? The fact that someone does not support a certain political candidate?
It has nothing, from my standpoint and our findings.
Well,
it
that's
has
been
nothing
brought
to
up
do with
multiple
that.
times today, that you said because of the email where he said that we'll stop that.
My point being, it doesn't matter who he's trying to stop. What I've said repeatedly is, I don't care whether he was trying to stop the local election, the presidential election, or any candidate. An FBI agent cannot take a position or state like that they would consider using their official action to affect any candidates.
I agree with that, but I do not want a slippery slope that this president is immune to anyone not agreeing with him. And I've heard that repeatedly today as if it's a capital crime because someone did not agree or support. But I do support what you're saying in the role of an FBI agent, that we do not expect that. And I want to be clear, this is a democracy still, and we still have freedom of speech. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from the state of North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to yield my 5 minutes to you.
I thank the gentlelady. Inspector General Horowitz, I want to go back for a couple of minutes on the issue of intent. I mean, am I correct? Is that your understanding from what Jim Comey said, that the missing element was some element of intent that he was reading into the statute?
That's what he said. I think what the prosecutors were looking at was knowledge. And
Knowledge of the wrongfulness of her conduct, or knowledge that her arrangement with herself may have allowed classified information to traverse her server?
knowledge that classified information actually did transit through her server.
All right.
Because of the absence of markings.
Well, the questions I have for you are equally applicable, whether the missing intent is knowledge or intent. Can you think of a better way to determine what an actor knew than to ask the actor what he or she knew? Am I missing some better repository of evidence than to actually interview the target or the suspect yourself?
I would say there could be instances where there would be better evidence, like contemporaneous recordings, as opposed to the interview where the person might not be candid, but
I'm
you
not
clearly
aware,
would want to.
I'm not aware of those in this case, but perhaps you know
Correct.
something I do not.
No, I'm not, but I'm just saying, you asked hypothetically, is there a better way to get evidence of someone's state of mind? It might
Given
be.
the evidentiary restrictions in this case,
Correct.
can you think of any better way to resolve that issue of knowledge than to actually interview the target herself?
No, I think you would want to interview the target herself.
All right. And what would you ask the target? You were a highly decorated federal prosecutor from one of the most prestigious districts in the country. What would you ask the defendant if you were trying to determine whether or not that person, that suspect, had knowledge?
Well, you'd certainly want to start at the beginning, which is, why did the server come to be set up? What was the rationale behind it? What did you understand it would be used for? Questions like that, because so much of it would be focused on what the intent, rationale, thinking was behind creating your own separate server or domain name from the outset.
If multiple explanations had been given in the past on that very issue, would you ask the suspect or the target to reconcile those different explanations?
Presumably, you would ask the subject during the interview in any area where there might be differing reports of testimony or recollections.
If there have been false exculpatory statements made in connection with a fact pattern, would you ask the target or the suspect to explain those false exculpatory statements?
I think if you were interviewing any witness, you would want to ask them about information that was out there that would suggest there was a false exculpatory.
When I use the phrase consciousness of wrongdoing, what does that mean to you?
That means you have an awareness, perhaps unstated, that the conduct that you've engaged in is wrongful in some way.
What about concealment?
Well, that can mean, I guess, different things depending upon the nature of the concealment. It can be active, it can be passive at some level, but it's keeping something from somebody else. And, you know, we have a concern here about concealment on what happened in connection with July 5th.
How about the destruction of evidence?
Again, that can be personal, or it can be knowing that someone else is going to do it, but it is obviously destroying evidence or information that's has evidentiary value.
I guess what I'm kind of struggling with a little bit, I was actually asked over the weekend whether or not I think she should have been charged. I can't answer that question because I don't think she was interviewed properly. And it's very difficult to go back and conduct a proper interview after one has already been botched. Did you see all of the questions that you and I just went over in the 302? Were all of those asked of her during that July interview?
I think one of the concerns that's been raised is that a 302 only being a summary of what was said, that there isn't a transcript or other more definitive report on precisely all the questions and answers. So we have a summary, and that's what we're working off of that. It's an extensive summary, but it's still not a transcript.
Well, given the fact that you and I agree that actually talking to the witness, the suspect, the target might be, absent a contemporaneous recording, some of the better evidence on knowledge and intent, how in the hell was Jim Comey able to draft an exoneration press release 6 weeks before that interview took place?
I think it's clear from looking at what we uncovered that by that point in time, they had largely concluded what they had concluded.
But my question is, if what you're missing was knowledge and or intent, and the single best repository for that evidence is the person you've yet to talk to, how in the hell can you make that conclusion?
I think I'll give you what the answer was that we got back, which was, of course, we kept open the possibility that we would find some evidence that would change that view. That was the explanation we were given.
If that were true, did you find drafts of inculpatory press releases?
We did not.
You found no memos or drafts where he had decided to charge her?
That's correct. We were told, by the way, by the prosecutors, as you see here, that they did not draft anything until after the interview, precisely because they wanted to wait before making a final judgment for the interview.
Isn't that what we normally do? Wait until the last interview is? It's my last question I'll have for you. Back when you did trial work, do you remember the judge ever admonishing the jury that you are not to make up your mind until the last witness has testified and the last piece of evidence has been introduced? Do you remember a jury ever being told that by a judge?
Not only do I remember that as a prosecutor, but I actually served on a jury last year. So I remember that from the judge's instruction.
It's kind of one of the basic precepts of our justice system is that you wait until it's over before you draw a conclusion. And I am just dumbfounded that Director Comey would draft a press release and cite the missing element when the single best repository of potential evidence on that element had yet to be talked to. I find that stunning. But I'm also stunningly out of time. So I'll go to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And from the Amazon jungles to the streets of Shalimar, Florida, I've had a chance to observe the patriotic service of many frontline FBI agents, and I'm in violent agreement with Director Wray that the information in your report does not in any way impugn the incredible work that they do. Refresh my recollection. We know who Lisa Page is. She sent all these bad text messages about Donald Trump, but we don't know who FBI agents 1 through 5 are. Why the disparate treatment?
So when we write up our report, we apply Privacy Act and other laws to decide whose name we can disclose and whose name on balance we think is a legal matter we can't. That's why you see some names in here and some names anonymized. We have the request from the committee. As I mentioned, we sought to get approval from the FBI to send that information forward.
What was the reason the FBI gave you as to why we couldn't learn who FBI agents 1 through 5 are?
They mentioned a couple of reasons, but the primary reason was that because those individuals, 2 of them were agents, one's a lawyer, work on counterintelligence matters, they had a security and safety.
Peter Strzok worked on counterintelligence matters, and we know who he is.
That's correct.
Why the disparate treatment?
I'm just telling you what was reported to us, and, you know, as I
Who's attorney number 2?
I have to think about who that is, but again, I'd want to make sure that what I was saying wasn't putting someone in jeopardy or at risk. And
What was the reason the FBI gave for not telling us who attorney number 2 is?
same reason, that that individual works on counterintelligence matters and safety and security reasons, as well as some other reasons.
What were they? I want to
have to
obtain
go
the full
back.
universe of reasons because, you know, I feel as though sunshine, transparency will be the way to root out this bias that we seem to see reflected. Are you familiar with the resistance movement in this country?
I am familiar with it from looking at some of these text messages, but I am not personally
What's your general
familiar with it.
understanding of what that movement is?
I just could tell you what it says here, somehow, you know, resist what's going on in the country in terms of the government, governance. I have no real personal knowledge.
Does it mean
of
resist Donald Trump? Resist his presidency?
That's my understanding, certainly as it was played out here.
So you've got Peter Strzok, who goes from the Hillary Clinton email investigation to the FBI Trump-Russia investigation to the Mueller probe. You've got Lisa Page, who goes from the Hillary Clinton email investigation to the FBI Russia investigation to the Mueller probe. And then you have attorney number 2, who similarly goes from the Hillary Clinton email investigation to the Trump-Russia investigation to the Mueller probe. It seems like a very bizarre coincidence that the way people tended to end up on the Mueller probe was some association with Hillary Clinton. Whether it was the people I just identified, or whether it was Andrew Weissman, who attended Hillary Clinton's election night party, or whether it was Jeannie Rhee, who had defended the Clinton Foundation in FOIA defenses, it seems so bizarre that the people you would go and accumulate to prosecute the President of the United States and investigate him would be so intertangled with these fact patterns regarding Hillary Clinton. Does that strike you as odd?
I don't know if it strikes me as odd, other than I know it, as to the 3 individuals you mentioned, occurred.
Is that usual for someone who's like directly tied to one element of a fact pattern to then migrate over to these other
It's
investigations?
an excellent point, Congressman. We actually make that here as well, that from a management matter, having done corruption cases, you wouldn't put someone who just investigated an individual on one side to go investigate the other person.
Who made those
My
staffing decisions?
Would have been the leadership of the FBI.
So it would have been James Comey who's been fired. It would have been Andrew McCabe, who has been referred for criminal prosecution as a consequence of your good work. Attorney number 2 says, "Viva la resistance," while actively investigating President Trump. Is that right?
That's my understanding.
And does it trouble you that someone who was tasked with investigating the president was associating himself with a resistance movement against the very same president?
I'll say what I said earlier. I don't care who that person was investigating. That person should not be making comments about an individual or related to a person they're investigating or the FBI is working on.
Well, it will be totally unacceptable to my constituents to say that there was a person who went from the Hillary Clinton email investigation to the Trump-Russia investigation to the Mueller probe, who identified himself and who you identified as the lead FBI lawyer on the Mueller probe, and we don't get to know who that person is, associating with the resistance, going after the president after this totally botched Hillary Clinton email investigation that you've appropriately highlighted. In this country, we cannot live in a world where unelected people at the FBI get to shelter someone who I believe was actively working against the president and actively associating and identifying with a movement that is intended to frustrate everything that this president is trying to do. So I hope we get that information, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Inspector General Horowitz, not only for your long patience today, but for your professionalism on so many levels. One of the things that I think the facts seem to bear out from this hearing today, that there was bias by key investigators collecting evidence. Their investigative evidence was provided then to prosecutors. these prosecutors, based on that evidence, acted accordingly without any bias of their own in coming to their conclusions. Is it possible that prosecutors can be misled by biased investigators who guide or withhold evidence?
It's certainly a possibility, and that, you know, something like that could happen. We didn't, in the evidence we reviewed, we didn't see that here, but certainly.
Well, given the actions of the investigators expressing bias, which was very detailed in the report, and the statements and draft statements of the director months before the investigation was complete, do you think it possible they already had an outcome in mind?
Oh, well, I think clearly they had that the FBI, through Director Comey, had an outcome in mind, given the drafting starting in early May.
And while prosecutors were found to be unbiased in their conclusions, did that same conclusion exist with those making investigative decisions, whose evidence would ultimately be provided to the prosecutors?
Well, Director Comey, obviously heading up the FBI and his folks, we lay out here that they believed by early May that absent confession, some unusual event or discovery of evidence they didn't anticipate, or false statements, that they thought this was heading towards a declination.
And I guess that, you know, that's the concern that the American people have, is the investigation was not even closed, that we have the Bureau, the Justice Department. In fact, in your own reports, and I quote, "We were particularly concerned about the text messages sent by Strzok and Page that potentially indicated or created the appearance that investigative decisions they made were impacted by bias or improper considerations." Along that same vein, quote, "We did not have confidence that Strzok's decision to prioritize the Russia investigation over following up on the mid-year related investigative lead discovered on the Wiener laptop was free from bias." And then a last one to highlight here: "It is not only indicative of a biased state of mind, but even more seriously implies a willingness to take official action to impact the presidential candidate's electoral prospects." And then you highlight that this is antithetical to the core values of the FBI and the Justice Department, and I think that's true. In your report, you discuss also that Mr. Comey was concerned about a classified issue specific to Lynch, and that there are questions that many of us have related to these issues that arose in March 2016 that allege bias or attempts by Attorney General Lynch to impede the mid-year investigations, and that some of that information suggests or could that Comey may have also been attempting to influence the investigation. Your report says that you detail perhaps some answers to some of these questions and others in a classified appendix. When will you provide the committees copies of the classified index?
So that classified appendix was classified by the intelligence community. We don't do that. It ended up, we're not the classifiers. They classified it at such a high level, some of the information, that it made it impossible to make it available to the members as we wanted to. Only certain members would have been able to see it. We have gone back to the intelligence agencies and say, please let us know what is this material that gets us to this level so we can bring it down to a level where everybody can look at it. We just got a report back from some of the intel agencies today. We're hoping, or last night, we're hoping to get the rest of it in the next few days. I've raised this with the Deputy Attorney General's office that we need this changed. You need to see it. It's important for the Congress to see it, and we're going to work hard to get that.
Absolutely. And can the House hold a copy in our secure
That's exactly what I want to do.
an unredacted copy?
Right. That's exactly what I'm working.
Because we've been through this rodeo before, and I've gone down to the tank and I've read redacted things, and then had members, high-placed members of our Bureau and Justice Department say, well, this is because of Freedom of Information Act redactions, as if that were a grounds to withhold information from Congress. Which agency in specific? Is it the CIA that's making the determination that members of committees are not authorized to view the classified index?
My understanding is it's speaking with the ODNI, the Office of Director of National Intelligence, and the CIA, that they're working through these issues with the FBI.
Well, I thank you for that, Inspector General, and thank you for your great work. And we will be right there backing you up that oversight and judiciary committees with obvious jurisdiction need, for the sake of the American people, to see what it is that they are concealing. And we await those answers. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time.
Gentleman from Oklahoma yields back. The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Horowitz, thank you for your time today and your dedicated work. I'm going to speak fast. 18 U.S.C. Section 793F reads in relevant part, as you know, whoever being entrusted with or having lawful possession or control of any document or writing relating to the national defense through gross negligence permits the same to be removed from its proper place of custody or delivered to anyone in violation of his trust shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for not more than 10 years or both. Isn't it true that Director Comey's initial draft statement, which he shared with FBI senior leadership, criticized Clinton's handling of classified information as, quote, grossly negligent?
That's correct.
And according to your report, Lisa Page is identified as the person who raised concerns about the term gross negligence in that draft statement, and it was later replaced with the phrase, quote, extremely careless. Is that right?
That's correct.
Isn't it true that gross negligence is a legal term with criminal implications, while extremely careless is a subjective term with no criminal implications?
Correct.
I want to pick up on what Chairman Gowdy asked you a few moments ago, and you've said a couple times today the focus in this particular investigation was on actual knowledge. Is that correct?
That's correct.
The problem I have, and the real question here, is that that's not a standard of focus or an interpretation that's provided in the express language of the operative statute. Isn't that right?
That's correct. And when I say this investigation, obviously means the department's mid-year investigation, not our review.
Right. And so the department used this application of the statute. There's no express language in the statute to give them that authority. The question is, where did that come from? By what authority did these investigators unilaterally decide to employ an actual knowledge standard in interpreting the statute?
Well, as we looked at the written evidence, the documents, and then interviewing the prosecutors, they described their rationale for interpreting the statute that way as both a legal consideration because of concerns over whether a prosecution would be upheld if it was successful, and their belief that, based on the legislative history of the statute, it required something more than pure gross negligence, and the statute's absence of a definition of gross.
And was there any precedent, specific precedent for them to do that?
They were relying on prior department precedents. In other words, how the department, they believed, interpreted the statute over time.
Let me move on. Of course, everyone in America now knows the sordid history and the infamous text messages between FBI agents Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, including the August 8th, 2016 exchange where Strzok assured Ms. Page that they would, quote, stop the election of Donald Trump. Isn't it reasonable to conclude that criminal charges brought against Mr. Trump's opponent, Hillary Clinton, would hurt her campaign and thus potentially help Donald Trump to be elected?
I think that's probably a given.
Matter of
I
common
have to
sense,
think a little
right?
bit about.
And wouldn't that outcome be the opposite of what Strzok promised his paramour in those text messages that we've all seen now?
I guess so, though frankly I haven't stepped back and thought about, and frankly haven't focused on what the implications of it ultimately could be as it played out. Just sort of as it was problematic.
Well, the American people have, and many Americans would logically conclude that this political bias directly affected specific investigative decisions and judgment calls, but we'll disagree about that. I'm running out of time. I want to get to something that's very personal for you. By all accounts, you're an American patriot. You're an esteemed and trusted public servant, and we would thank you for that service. Let me ask you this personal question. Is the American people's trust in our justice system and the people's faith in our institutions important to you as an individual?
Absolutely.
And do you believe those things are important to our republic as a whole?
Yes.
In your important role at DOJ, do you believe you have a personal duty to help guard the integrity of and maintain the people's faith in our institutions?
Yes.
Let me ask you this very important question then, based on that. If your report had concluded that the evidence showed that improper considerations, including political bias of FBI agents, did directly affect specific investigative decisions, do you think that would have risked eroding the American people's trust in our justice system and the people's faith in our institutions?
it could have had a, I guess even, could have had a greater impact. I think this has an impact, standing alone.
But does it, would you agree that it stands to reason that a man in your position might be tempted to rationalize a report that political bias did not affect the Clinton investigation as somehow serving a greater good of not completely undermining the country's faith in our FBI?
Look, I look at this evidence, and my team looks at this evidence based on our judgments, our best judgments on this. We don't pull our punches because of concerns over how it'll seem or appear. I think anybody who tells me that having just completed an investigation where I called the former FBI director insubordinate and issued a report about the deputy director lying under oath, I don't think anybody can accuse us of pulling our punches on that.
Could you at least see, I'm out of time, could you at least see how reasonable people might reach a different conclusion, though?
As I said in my opening, Congressman, the purpose of laying out this in 500-plus pages is precisely so the American public, who are the people who I serve, we all serve, can make their own judgments. And people will agree or disagree. We've done our best to put our judgment on it. I would just assure everybody, we didn't pull any punches on it.
Appreciate your service. I yield back.
Gentleman from Louisiana yields back. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
I thank the chair. What a long day, Mr. Horowitz. Thank you for your patience. You know, following up on the gentleman from Louisiana's style of questioning as well as content, would it be fair to conclude by the American people that a hearing such as this is designed to discredit an ongoing investigation, criminal investigation, by the special counsel Robert Mueller, and using your report to do that? Might that be something?
I'm not going to speculate.
Of course you're not.
On anybody's
Of course
intent
you're
here.
not. But that kind of leading question deserves a leading question in return. One suspects sitting here that we're up to no good. Two committees with a big hearing to try to prove that there was such unbelievable bias within the FBI, political bias, that it taints everything they're doing. And I look at your conclusion. You say there are many lessons to be learned from the department and the FBI's handling of the mid-year investigation, but among the most important is the need to respect the institution's hierarchy and structure and to follow established policies, procedures, and norms, even in the highest profile and most challenging investigations. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is it established policy, Mr. Horowitz, DOJ policy, to disband an investigation, an ongoing investigation, because, say, somebody's personal lawyer says it's an investigation that will be cleared up with a pardon?
No policy.
There's no such policy.
Department, correct.
In fact, that would be bad policy, would it not?
That would not be a good policy.
Is it established Department of Justice policy to disband an investigation because, let's say, the subject or one of the potential subjects of the investigation calls it a witch hunt?
No, I think as the director said yesterday during our Senate hearing, that decision is made solely by the FBI. And
Is it established Department of Justice policy to disband an ongoing criminal investigation because a high-level government official says it's time to wrap it up?
not unless it's someone who has authority over it and has made that conclusion that it's a reasonable based on the facts and the law.
So I take your report to basically say we have to return to a normal process and allow investigations to work their will, but we can't infect them with bias. I thought I read in your report, despite hours of hearings here with 76 members, I thought your report concluded that in the conclusion with respect to Secretary Clinton's emails, you did not detect any evidence of the effect of bias in that conclusion.
On the conclusion of the prosecutors on whether or not to charge.
Right. So despite all this Sturm und Drang, there's no evidence that a bias influenced that conclusion.
The prosecutor's conclusion, correct.
By the way, I remember Mr. Nadler a little earlier asking you about because we're hearing so much about two particular FBI agents who favored apparently Hillary Clinton, or at least did not like Mr. Trump. A lot of us joined in that sentiment. But are you aware of any FBI agents who in fact love Mr. Trump and didn't like Mrs. Clinton?
We looked at the team that worked on this investigation and the Clinton email investigation, and we reported what we found in terms of biased text.
Did anyone ever refer you to, say, the New York field office of the FBI?
There were comments made by the FBI General Counsel about his understanding of the view of agents in the New York field office.
My time is almost up, and there are a lot of people who believe the New York office had profound bias that was anti-Clinton that actually influenced Mr. Comey's thinking. I just wish the fervor shown here was reflected in our willingness to look objectively at other needs for investigation, especially with respect to cabinet members in the current administration. I believe we now have over 50 subpoena requests in my committee to the chairman, none of which have been issued. I wish we had in-depth hearings with respect to potential corruption and ethical lapses by members of the cabinet, but we haven't done that. But we are going to spend a joint committee hearing, full committee, looking in the past at something that's already been adjudicated. I want to thank you, Mr. Horowitz, and your colleagues for a fine piece of professional work, and I hope it doesn't get distorted through this process. I yield back.
Gentleman from Virginia yields back. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Okay, we've already spent a lot of time on Mr. Strunk and Ms. Page, but they have obviously said things that you would consider that they had a strong bias towards Ms. Clinton becoming president, correct?
We were concerned about their bias statements, yes.
Right. Oh, and by the way, if something happens or they make decisions that favor Ms. Clinton and they have talked about bias towards Ms. Clinton, you will not say that it has necessarily affected their decision, correct? You will give them the benefit of the doubt in your paper?
I don't know if it's right to say we give them the benefit of the doubt as opposed to we would go and look for the evidence to see if we could find evidence of bias.
Okay, but if they make a decision that happens to favor Ms. Clinton or happens to hurt Mr. Trump, you do not by itself say that's an indication of bias?
Well, I would say that with regard to the October decision to not prioritize the Wiener laptop and prioritize the Russia investigation, we reached the determination we were concerned that it could have evidenced bias.
Okay. Now, there were 5 other people that you mentioned specifically in the report that apparently said things that would indicate they either did not like Mr. Trump, correct?
3 others plus the 2 of them, 5
Plus the
total.
3, so a total of 5. Did you find anybody else in any of the emails you looked at throughout the investigation, even minor bit players, that would indicate political bias?
You know, we saw in various messages sort of discussions that were tangential, in our view, to the events, and so I can't sit here and I have to check to see which side everybody was on and who they spoke about, but nothing that we thought connected in any way.
Okay, but there were other comments on the election.
There's going to be people making comments.
Comments, of course, they're going to make comments. It would
So
seem
that's,
to
I'm
me,
just hesitant to say.
it would seem to me in this environment, it would stick in your mind if anybody happened to make a comment indicating they wanted President Trump to win. Do you ever remember any comments like that from any of these emails?
I don't remember anything as I sit here.
Okay. Several of these people were involved in more than one investigation, which kind of concerns me. Was it a coincidence that people who had an anti-Trump bias wound up in 2 separate investigations or 3 separate investigations?
Well, what we describe here is the decision was made in July after the Clinton investigation was closed in Director Comey's announcement and the Attorney General's announcement when the Russia matter opened to take some of those same members and put them on that next investigation, which we state is, from a management standpoint, something we would be thought was.
Was it a coincidence,
concerning
though, they
decision.
happened to be Clinton partisans? I guess that's my concern. Of all these seas of FBI people, we're told they're so professional, is it a coincidence that people who have so brazenly expressed anti-Trump sentiment would wind up on these 2 key political investigations?
Well, just keep in mind, these texts aren't discovered till 2017 when we start our review. So
Right, I understand that, but what you think was It hits me as unusual, given the huge volume of work the FBI has to do, that these clearly anti-Trump people wound up on these two politically charged investigations, no?
Look, I don't know exactly how they ended up on the other investigation, other than Mr. Strzok was at the time the Deputy Assistant Director of Counterintelligence. So
Yep. Are you investigating the Russian investigation?
we are now looking at, in light of the referrals we've had over the last several months, the question about the FISA issues that were referred to us, as well as the campaign-related questions that have been referred to us.
Okay, but you're not prepared yet to talk about any information.
No, it would certainly be
Political bias or
premature.
not.
We're still investigating it for the very reasons that people have expressed concern about the
I'll give you a broader question, which involves not just this investigation, but the whole, what we'll call the swamp. I don't mean this to be a partisan thing, because I think this is an unusual presidential election. It wasn't really a Republican versus Democrat election. It was kind of a swamp versus non-swamp. Because a lot of the Republicans, I don't think, wanted Mr. Trump to win either, because they were kind of wedded to the swamp. When I look at the voting results in the District of Columbia and surrounding areas, I think the whole country in general is about half Clinton, half Trump. But you look at Montgomery County, 19% Trump, Alexandria County, 17%, Arlington County, 16%, Prince George County, 8%, District of Columbia, 4%. We're living in an area here which is just so out of whack with the rest of the country, you know, so right across the board that it's hard to believe. Are we in a situation here in which, not just regard to the FBI, but other federal agencies as well, we have to worry that political bias may creep into decision-making? And my constituents are worried, IRS, EPA, everything, that if it's known that they are supporters or people who want to reduce the swamp, that these agencies may come after them. Is this should be an overriding concern of people living in this rather unusual area here?
The gentleman's out of time, but you may answer the question.
Mention, Congressman, I think what's so concerning about this and these texts is because it creates that appearance, and rightfully so, that concern. You know, the Justice Department and the FBI has offices in every part of this country. Some parts of the country have voting records one way, some have the other way. When you show up in an office and you work for the Justice Department, you work for the FBI, it doesn't matter whether you're in a red state, a blue state, a purple state, a red district, a green district, it should have zero bearing. You walk in that door, if you can't be a professional and walk in that door and do your job, you got to get a different job. That's what it's all about. And I've seen commentators write about this, and I had a colleague in Southern District of New York who's written about this. We went to the office, and I didn't know what my colleagues' political views were. I just knew they cared about investigating the heck out of the case, and if someone deserved to be charged, they were charged, and if someone deserved to be convicted, they brought the case to the courtroom to see if they could, to see what the jury would decide. And that's what the Justice Department's about. And if you can't walk in the door and leave your views behind, you got to get a different job.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman in Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was reported that on May 15th, you completed a draft of the report that we're discussing today, and then you circulated all of it or portions of it to various individuals, Mr. Comey, McCabe, Loretta Lynch, Lisa Page, Peter Strzok. Were there others that received the portions of that draft?
So individuals who provided voluntary testimony, whose conduct is critiqued in here, as a matter of fairness, and we do this in every single review we do, we change no practices here. We give them a chance to come in as a matter of fairness to tell us if they think we got it wrong, or to give us additional evidence if they think we missed something.
Right,
And
so
that's
I appreciate
do.
that. You testified to that earlier today, so I'm wondering, did you give it to anyone else other than those people I just named?
Yes, so
Okay.
the individuals in here who you see's conduct was critiqued, we would give it to them, and as a matter of course, every IG does this. We
Sure.
give it to the department.
And that would be like
and the
so you
component.
gave it to, and I don't mean to interrupt, but we only have 5 minutes. I've been waiting for hours. You've been very good here, being many hours, but you've got to at least talk, and I haven't got to do that till just now, and I live to talk. So, so I guess what I'm asking is, did you give it to Prosecutor 1, Agent 1? They all got it, right? So did they respond? Did these
Some
people?
did, some didn't.
Okay. And I guess my question at this point is, we've sent you a letter asking for copies of the original draft, any alterations made, edits, red lines, and I hope that we can get that from you. I want to go to, is there a chance we're going to get any of that information from
What
you?
I'd like to do is we normally do, and I like to do, is engage with you and the
Perfect.
committee about it. I understand the concern. I want to talk it through with you and the other members who signed the letter, and the chairs and the ranking member, and have a candid discussion about it.
Love to do that. We can do that offline.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great, thank you. So you testified earlier this morning when Mr. Jordan from Ohio first questioned you. He took several hits at you. You must have felt like a piñata. Don't feel bad.
Not at all.
I get that all the time. That Peter Strzok led the the Hillary Rodham Clinton, the investigation into her emails. You remember saying that?
Yes.
Okay. And then on page 148 of your report, you mentioned the critical roles that both Strzok and Page played in most of the decisions made by the FBI, right?
Correct.
Fair statement. And
Yes.
And so Lisa Page's duty was she was advising the Deputy Director Andrew McCabe legally, and from reading this, I get the impression that on a lot more than legal, she's given me perhaps even some strategic information and advice as well, and counsel. And as you just said, Mr. Strzok, he basically led the investigation, and he was acting in some ways through that chart of order. He's kind of the liaison between all the other analysts and the decision makers. But he is kind of in the decision making because he's always there, the decision making body. He's given inputs, and that's what I want to talk about today. We've been talking about bias a lot, and everybody walks in with bias, and you have to be able to set it aside. But in this particular thing, the output, and the way you phrased it, and you've been very careful as you've answered today, and in this report, you said the bias of these people did not directly affect the outcome. But I'm here to suggest to you that inputs affect outcomes. The outputs come on. So when you have this very notion of these people, for all we know, they're filtering information. We don't know anything really what's going on in the decision-making process. You can't recreate it, but we know that there's certain outputs, and those outputs point to Hillary Clinton's not going to be charged. The biases that are reflected by these two people who have extraordinary inputs seems to indicate that they could have impacted those outputs. Am I wrong on that? I view what you've said here. So what I want to say is, could they have indirectly affected the outcome here?
It could have, and we don't rule it out. And frankly, I think what you have a right to expect from us is this kind of report, laying out the facts so that you and every member and every person in this country can make their own assessment.
Well, I will say in my last second, that you've written a report that the other folks that disagree with me will say that, see, there was no bias here. You know, if there was any bias, it was against Hillary Clinton. And people on my side look at it and say, you got people working here in the highest levels who appear to have been controlling and the inputs that are going into the decision-making process, and that indicates that the ultimate output may indeed have been biased. Thank you. I have no further time.
Gentleman from Arizona yields back. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, let me paint a little picture of the FBI that I knew for many years, and I think most would agree. They are the premier law enforcement agency not just in the United States, but I think most likely in the world. Would you agree with that?
I think they're viewed, and I'll say one of, because we oversee other law enforcement agencies at the Justice
Oh,
Department.
okay. Well, I'll let you off the hook on that one. But also that Mr. Struck, who's risen to a very high level within that organization, has to be a premier agent within the premier agency, the FBI.
That's certainly what we were told.
You agree with that?
Yeah.
And so, and in fact, I don't know that the FBI, at least in the 40 years that I've been in law enforcement, ever conducted an investigation that brought the integrity of the agency and the investigative process under such scrutiny and questioning of the integrity of the agency. Would you agree with that?
It certainly has brought incredible scrutiny and undercut the credibility of the organization in a way that is unfair to all these thousands of agents out there.
Exactly. And I've never seen anything like it. And in fact, even Agent Struck, I don't know of anything in his past that ever questioned his integrity and his service to the FBI or his country.
I'm not aware of anything.
So when I look at your report, and then you outline several investigative and prosecutorial missteps in this particular case, and I'll read just a few of them for you. This is from the Roman numeral 1 in the summary. The preference for consent over compulsory process to obtain evidence. Decision to obtain, not to obtain, or to seek to review certain evidence such as the personal devices used by Secretary Clinton's senior aides. The use of voluntary witnesses over these interviews. Quote, decisions to enter into letter use or queen for a day immunity agreements with 3 witnesses, some of which I think might have been potential targets as well, had the potential anyway. The use of consent agreements and active production immunity to obtain the laptops used by Clinton's attorneys, Cheryl Mills and Heather Samuelson, to cull her personal and work-related emails. The handling of the Clinton interview on July 2nd, the tarmac meeting, the mid-year exam delay and looking into the Anthony Weiner laptop situation, Director Comey's drafting of an exoneration letter in May. So my question is, when you look at these things in their totality, you look at them individually, you may not see much, but you know in a civil rights prosecution, you look at patterns or practices that will overcome any written policy that they may be presenting, and all a plaintiff has to do is show a pattern or practice to overcome a defense by an organization that, you know, we have this policy against, So when you say that you found political bias, but it had no effect on the investigation, it seems to negate this pattern or practice that clearly existed in this investigation.
I want to say, we didn't find that it didn't have any impact on the investigation. We couldn't possibly have looked at all these decisions, as you said, that covered all this period of time. What we found was focused on the individual investigations, and I think what's important for people to understand is, our responsibility as inspectors, as an inspector general or as inspectors general, in looking at these issues, is not to say this was thorough or not thorough, or the best choice or not the best choice, or could have been done more aggressively or not, but we're looking at, was there misconduct?
Let me ask one more question very quickly. Have you ever seen a public relations campaign mounted surrounding an investigation like we saw here, where there's a SAC conference so that the agency can pass down information on this case so that they can swat down, quote, swat down stories about it. And they even briefed retirees. Have you ever seen that before?
It's a great question, Congressman. Actually, the first in yesterday's hearing and today was asked about that portion of the report. And it doesn't directly affect this investigation, but for the reasons you indicated, I think we were concerned, particularly in the context of when it was occurring, which was in October.
Correct.
During the campaign. And in our view, you look at that and you say, you know what, when there's a campaign going on and either side sort of commenting on this, the best place for the Justice Department to be is on the sidelines. The political debate will be the political debate. It might be fair, it might be unfair, but when you start doing that and sending out talking points across the country,
Right.
you might actually be encouraging people, maybe unintentionally, we didn't make an intent finding here, but maybe unintentionally encouraging people to, as you suggested, get the word out. Well, it may cause other people to want to speak who maybe don't agree with the talking points. And so that was one of the areas that we had concern about, and I appreciate you raising that, Congressman, because I do
My
agree
time
with
is
you.
up. I just can't figure out how Peter Strzok is still at the FBI.
Gentleman yields,
Mr. Chairman.
gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, General Horowitz. I have a very high regard for you. I think you know that. Your report states that various witnesses told you that the mishandling of classified information was a persistent practice of the State Department, and that the State Department was so screwed up in the handling of classified information that if they'd wanted to prosecute Secretary Clinton, that they'd had to prosecute 150 State Department people. Does that basically invalidate the statute?
It doesn't. That's what they told us was one of their rationales, though, for it.
Well, I don't know if you're going to allow me to do this with you, but I want to do this in regard to the statement of an insurance policy, okay? It's not in regard to the Russia probe. I know that's coming later. But obviously, Andrew McCabe put Peter Strzok in charge of the Russia probe. Are you aware that Strzok went to London in July of 2016?
I've learned of that through various public reports.
And I think it would be fair to say that McCabe approved that trip and approved the expenditures for that.
I don't know the answer one way or the other.
I just wonder if what other justification there could have been for a trip to London at that particular time other than the Russia probe. And what concerns me was that when he returned, he almost immediately launched that probe. That McCabe, I think, approved him going to London. He came back and he launched it. Do you think there's any possibility that Strzok had prior knowledge that Christopher Steele was assembling the dossier?
You know, that's one of the issues we have been asked to look at, and so we're in the middle of that work on how that played out with regard to the FISA application.
And I'm glad that you made that point, because I think another question I need to ask, was there any possibility that the dossier was at least part of Strzok's insurance policy? Because that statement came later, I believe.
Right. The insurance policy statement came up on
Well, here's what concerns me about it, is that you've got McCabe, whose wife received almost $700,000 in campaign contributions from the Clintons, was almost 40% of her total campaign contributions. And obviously, there was a very strong relationship. McCabe put Strzok in charge of this. He either sent Strzok to London or allowed him to go, approved it. Do you think that either of them had knowledge that the Clinton campaign paid for the dossier?
I don't know the answer as I sit here, but that, you know, is something as part of the review that we're doing, it will be touched on in terms of the dossier.
Well, and I appreciate that. I look forward to reading that report. And I understand, you know, what you're trying to do. But let me ask you this in regard to bias. And I want to be maybe the one guy that doesn't go over time today. All things being equal, and if someone said they thought that another inspector general would be more qualified than you to do this investigation, I think we'd both agree that there was some bias involved there. It might be qualified, it might be justified, but there'd be some bias there that they preferred someone else over you, okay? But if that same person called you and your colleagues pieces of crap, and that's not what the word they used, or repeatedly referred to you as loathsome or an idiot, awful, used the F word in regard to you, referred to your team as retarded, crazies, or as Mrs. Clinton said, deplorables, I think that would go beyond bias. I think you might even consider that extreme prejudice or maybe even extreme animus. Would you agree with that?
Look, I think, as we've talked about, when we
I'm
presented
just
this-
asking this,
Yeah.
hypothetically, if I were responsible for the job, the assignments you got, and I made comments privately like that about you that later became public, how would you feel about that?
Oh, I think it certainly is evidence of a biased state of mind like we
But it
laid
would
out here as a
indicate that I
concern.
had made a determination that I was going to prevent you from advancing your career. I just would ask you, would you have any confidence that you would be treated fairly under those circumstances?
I think you'd have reason for concern, and it's precisely why this is so problematic.
And especially if it were persistent right to the very
correct.
end. I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman from Alabama yields back. The gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much, Mr. Horowitz, for being here. A January 14th, 2016 letter from IG Charles McCullough discusses sworn declarations that dozens of Secretary Clinton's emails were top secret and special access program levels. This information, as you well know, is so sensitive that even for IG McCullough, he had to get special clearance in order to even see them. Treating information like this improperly would almost certainly have resulted in serious consequences for just about anybody, not in this situation. This letter from IG McCullough, was out well before Comey changed the May memo language from, quote, gross negligence to extremely careless. And since we have a lot of viewers watching this, and we tend to, in this committee, both of these committees, be very legalese, could you describe for everyone the difference between those two phrases?
Well, gross negligence is a legal term found in Section 793, whereas extremely careless is a non-legal term to describe, or as used here by former Director Comey, to describe what his characterization was of the conduct.
So did I hear you correctly that there's really nothing in the U.S. Code that deals with, quote, extreme carelessness or extremely careless when it comes to handling classified information?
Correct.
Okay. So information classified at this level contains very critical information, critical to national security, protecting the identity of U.S. intelligence assets. Is it possible that Comey chose extremely careless or extreme carelessness precisely because of the fact that that phrase is not in the U.S. Code?
In fact, that's what we were told is the reason for the change was to take it from what was in the statute to something outside the statute.
Well, thank you. I think all of us on the committee and those watching appreciate that clarity. I want to follow up on something that Chairman Gowdy brought up earlier, and that has to do with the interview process. Secretary Clinton was voluntarily interviewed rather than appearing before the grand jury.
That's correct.
Were Secretary Clinton's attorneys, Mr. Mills and Samuelson, I believe their names, were present for that interview?
There were multiple lawyers present, including Ms. Mills and Ms. Samuelson.
Mills and Samuelson, interesting. Were they not also witnesses in this investigation?
They were.
It would strike me that's a little bit unusual to have witnesses a party to an interview with the subject of the investigation.
Which is why we found that it was not consistent with normal investigative practice. And actually, Director Wray yesterday also suggested that.
Was that interview recorded?
It was not.
Why?
The FBI, as a matter of its practice, does not record interviews of witnesses.
Is that one of your recommendations to change that? I would hope so.
We actually don't have that in a recommendation. That's been a subject of discussion for many, many years within the Justice Department.
So there was a written report.
There was a written summary report of the interview.
Oh, so only a summary. So when I read your report, the IG report, that the decision not to prosecute Secretary Clinton was essentially made prior to her interview. Did I read that correctly?
What we were told is, absent a confession or a false statement, the plan was to close the investigation immediately after the interview.
So if the decision not to prosecute was largely made prior to even talking to her, how could it, and there's been all of the discussion today about whether or not she had willful knowledge and intent. How could anybody even know if she had willful intent or knowledge if they didn't talk with her before they made the decision? And then secondly, with the conversation and what we now know is the very extreme bias, particularly of Strzok and several other agents who, as I read the report, were part of that investigation, how can anyone really be sure that there wasn't bias in the way that interview was conducted when it went to the prosecutorial decision?
And what we went and looked at was the summary and the preparation that went into the interview to see whether the questions that were intended to be asked were in fact asked. During that, in terms of whether individuals who were in the room were biased or expressed bias.
You would have there's absolutely no idea.
We wouldn't know one way or
Very
the other, although I would, say we, Mr. Strzok was in the room, but not one of the questioners, and we had concerns about his text messages, and one of the two questioners was one of the other three individuals we've referenced here as with problematic text messages.
Very disturbing. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Gowdy. Mr. Horowitz, I have a statement and then a quick question. I go home to Kentucky every weekend, and when I'm home, I'm talking to a lot of people all across the state. My district's very vast, from one end of the state to the other. When we're home during recess, I talk to a lot of people. The biggest complaint that I hear from the good, hardworking people in my congressional district in southern Kentucky is the disgusting news that they've seen about the obvious bias from the FBI and from the investigators. And it leads in to people's minds exactly what the president's been saying, that this is a witch hunt. This is a witch hunt that every time they turn on the television, there's news about the Russia investigation, very little news on certain media outlets about the things that obviously Hillary Clinton did that were illegal. The approval ratings for the FBI and the Department of Justice now, I would assume, are at record lows, probably lower than Congress, and that's not very good. What steps must the FBI take to restore confidence, to eliminate the obvious political bias that was displayed by reading your report with the FBI in this investigation? What steps does the FBI need to take to eliminate, not reduce, but eliminate political bias in the agency? Because anytime there's an investigation of any type, one of the main items in the case is conversations with the FBI, and as Congresswoman Handel said, you don't record things in the FBI; it's your word. The word today isn't worth what it should be from the nation's premier intelligence agency. So this is a very serious issue that is dividing America. It's really frustrating those of us on the Oversight Committee that have tried to find answers from an agency that, quite frankly, has not been transparent with the American public. What steps can the FBI take in the future to eliminate this and correct this problem and restore the confidence of America?
Well, I think one of the things we've laid out here, we have 9 recommendations in here on various systemic issues. But I think, as I said in my opening and as we say here, really getting back to core values and understanding and making sure that the organization at a leadership level and at a senior level across the organization understands the principles and the norms and follows them. And again, I will say, having been in AUSA, obviously it was many years ago now, but I don't think what occurred here represents what thousands of agents would do in terms of their political views or other biases they may have. They understand they may have views, but they understand when they go to work, those views stay behind. And that's what, it's at a core level, that's what really has to happen here, because it is why these kinds of text messages are so corrosive. It's because people see them and they say, how can someone be an FBI agent who has these views? Happens in civil rights cases. How can people have views we sometimes see when you look at their messages about the people they're investigating? It can't happen.
Well, when you have an agency that has a black eye, whether it's the VA or the FBI, I think the best decision a leader could do is change leadership. And I support what President Trump did in firing Comey. I think that was the right decision. And hopefully with your report and with the work of Congress, we can work to restore the confidence of the American public in the FBI and the Department of Justice. And Mr. Chairman, I have about a minute left. I would like to yield my time to my friend Mark Meadows.
I thank the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Horowitz. I want to come back to something we talked about earlier, the disclosure of FBI Attorney 1 and FBI Attorney 2. And you said, I think I'm correct, that they did not want that divulged because they actually worked in counterintelligence. Is that correct?
That's what we were told by the FBI.
Okay, but you know who the people are.
Correct.
And I would say, based on your report, I know who they are. And what I guess I'm concerned about is you know that they don't work for the counterintelligence division.
Well, two of the agents do.
I'm talking about attorneys.
There's one lawyer who's in here. So it's there are 5 people total.
Right.
Paige Strzok, 2 other agents.
But
and
you
an
had a
attorney.
dialogue between FBI Attorney 1 and 2.
Correct.
And those 2 attorneys, do they not work for Trish Anderson?
Those 2 attorneys work in the Office of General Counsel.
Yeah, and
where,
so would one of those attorneys be Sally Moyer?
I'm going to defer to what the FBI
But they don't work in
requested from them.
counterintelligence. I mean, if that's the reason the FBI is giving, they're giving you false information because they work
Well,
for the General
let me
Counsel.
just add, they were talking
Is
about,
the other one Kevin Kleinsmith?
They were talking about the other attorney there that we have their text messages
Right.
in here that they were concerned about, along with the other 2. I'm not here to articulate the FBI's interest. We oversee
Well,
the FBI.
we're going to get to the bottom of it, like Mr. Comer was talking about. And I think the other thing that I would ask you to look into, there is growing evidence that 302s were edited and changed. And it gets back to what Ms. Handel said in terms of those particular interview sessions. And those 302s, it is suggested that they were changed to either prosecute or not prosecute individuals, and that is very troubling, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
And
Gentlemen-
if I could just mention, we have been getting those kind of referrals, and as often happens when we issue reports like this, we get other information coming to us, and we are intending to follow up on that. But I just want to reassure you and the committee, I'm here to let you know what we're being told by the FBI is their concerns. Obviously, Director Wray and the leadership of the FBI and ourselves, I'm certainly not looking to step aside, but on this, but it is their interests that they need to be articulated to the committee.
Gentleman with North Carolina yields back. The gentleman, Mr. Rothfuss, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Inspector, for being here this afternoon and all day here. You identified a lot of devices that were part of the investigation in your report, the different servers and
Correct.
personal devices. In your investigation, did you review whether those conducting the mid-year investigation searched for emails with the clintonemail.com route on databases that held data collected pursuant to FISA?
I'm not sure as I sit here, but I can certainly get back to you promptly on that.
Yeah, I'd like to know that. Page 186 of the report, when discussing the topic of whether the FBI would have a separate announcement from the DOJ about the declination to prosecute, Director Comey said the FBI was in the middle of a 500-year flood. And the quote here is, quote, "I mean, to my mind, it was a crazy idea, but we were in a 500-year flood. As you all know, as you all have now investigated enough and lived enough to know that this is a circumstance that has never happened before. We're criminally investigating one of the candidates for president of the United States. President Obama's comments obviously weighed on me as well. You've got the president who has already said there's no there. And so all of that creates a situation where how do you get out of this without grievous damage to the institution?" Reading this sounds as though Director Comey, his decision in this context of having a separate statement was imbued with political considerations, does it not?
He was certainly speaking about the political perceptions that resulted from President Obama's comments and other actions he was concerned with.
Well, he was considering matters just beyond facts, wasn't he?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And he was considering how, in his own subjective view, that the FBI was going to be viewed in response to this investigation.
Agreed.
And the same would hold true not just for his July 5 press conference, but his October 28th letter.
Agree.
You wonder how the FBI gets to a point where there's a 500-year flood. You know, I represent Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and they had a horrific flood back in 1889. And there was a big rainstorm before that flood, but there were things going on years before. And if you read David McCullough's book about the flood, you understand that things were going on before. And to understand this in context, we're here today because you had the third highest official in the executive branch decide to conduct official business on a private server for whatever reason. And I read through this report and just see political consideration after political consideration. Isn't Mr. Comey's decision to usurp the authority of the Attorney General in order to protect the Bureau inherently a political decision?
I think you can certainly view it that way.
On page 10, the report states that Mr. Comey's decision-making process made an implicit assumption that President Clinton would be president. Isn't that yet another example of politics playing a role here?
It's certainly his reading the political tea leaves in his view.
When Mr. Comey described Attorney General Lynch's presence imbued corrosive doubt into the entire process, doesn't this confirm the need for a special counsel in this investigation from the very beginning?
I think if Director Comey's view was, as he laid out, the answer wasn't, I'm going to take over and announce the decision. The answer was, I'm going to go to the Attorney General, explain my concerns, and ask her to either recuse or get a special counsel.
You know, going back over the years and I talk about how the 500-year flood, things happening for years, and you look at everything that was circulating in the first Clinton administration and all the scandals that we saw then and the continuing scandals. I remember the 96 campaign and the fundraising scandal there, and Charlie Tree and Johnny Chung and Johnny Wan and Maria Siai, and Louis Freeh was looking at that, the director of the FBI, and he said, "It is difficult to imagine at that time a more compelling situation for an independent counsel." But Janet Reno never appointed one. Why wasn't a special counsel ever appointed in this Clinton email investigation? Looking at Attorney General Lynch, why is it that they never?
We have explanations here as to why it was. Attorney General Lynch said she didn't think the standard was met and that there should be one applied. Director Comey essentially told us that he was using it as a leverage point to get the investigation moving as opposed to it actually being presented for serious consideration.
But we see instance after instance where Director Comey was making political calculations.
Gentleman's out of time.
I think start, I'll go back to what we've talked about in here and what I talked about earlier. And as you referenced, it's easy to say there's a 500-year flood, but the reality is we're faced all the time with what people perceive to be unique circumstances. That doesn't mean you make various judgments along the way. In fact, I think many people would argue that's when it's most important to stay true to what the institution values are, norms are, procedures are. And you're right, the right approach here, if there was a concern that the Attorney General could not fairly or by appearance decide this, the right response would have been for Director Comey to present that to the Attorney General and for her to make a decision. But she ultimately was the one who was politically accountable in our system of government for that final decision, not him.
Gentleman yields back. This concludes today's hearing. I'll recognize the gentleman from Virginia and then the gentleman from Maryland for any concluding remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Mr. Horowitz. It's been a long day. I think you're going on 7 hours here with very little respite from that, but I think you've handled yourself well, and we very much appreciate that. You know, at the beginning of this hearing, I posed the question, why should Americans care about what we're talking about here today? And unfortunately, I think we heard from some of our members that we don't care about these emails anymore. We don't care about these GD emails and texts, I assume they're referring to as well, from Mr. Strzok and Ms. Page. But I'd like everyone here to think about, what if the shoe was on their foot? What if high-ranking people in the nation's most important law enforcement organization were talking about an investigation into them, and they showed that kind of animus, that kind of bias in the process? You, Mr. Horowitz, have a number of times today made it very clear that you understand how important it is that the American people have the assurance that when it comes to the enforcement of our laws, that justice is blind, and that the guarantee of our Constitution of equality under the law for all people is fulfilled. I don't think we can say that here right now, unfortunately, about this very sorry circumstance. And we're going to continue to pursue this until we have the assurance that the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Justice have cleaned house and are making the necessary changes to ensure that in the future, whether it's the 2020 presidential election or whether it's Jane Doe or Joe Smith's criminal investigation, that they will indeed experience equality under the law, and the kind of extreme bias that we've seen in looking at some of the most prominent investigations in American history will not happen again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Virginia yields. Gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. To Mr. Horowitz, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank the ladies and gentlemen behind you and all of those who have had anything to do with pulling this report together. I want to thank you for the recommendations, because I think they go to the heart of the problem. You know, as I sit here and I think about life, you know, and I tell my constituents this, I tell them I wish there were not a Republican and a Democratic Party. I wish I was not a quote, politician. You know why? Because I think that when people hear us a lot of time, or hear me, they just assume that I'm saying things based upon political expediency or trying to help a party, my party. But there are certain things that are about bigger than party, like country and being a human being. And I think that when we talk about, you know, when I read your report and I look at what you've done, it's the people like the ones that are sitting behind you that take an oath to do their very, very best and to be honest and to uphold the Constitution of our country. those are the people that will keep our democracy together. And I say it with all of the sincerity I have in my heart. Everywhere I go, Mr. Horowitz, and I want you to understand this, I've never seen so many people scared. They're scared. I mean, American citizens scared. And they're scared of where our country is going. But I think what you have done here today, that is examining, first of all, bringing to the table integrity. Bringing to the table integrity and honesty and just calling it like it is. You may have come out with a report that I didn't like. I mean, certain things I saw in the report that didn't sit well with me. But you know what? I'm able to walk away from here believing that you all upheld your oaths and your principles for honesty and integrity. Not about party, not about gender, none of that. Not pro-Trump, against Trump, Republican, whatever, but integrity. And that integrity, and I tell my staff, that integrity will you don't have to change from time to time. Whatever that integrity is and you meet that level, it's always going to be. So, the thing I'm trying to get through to you is that I want you to continue to do what you're doing. Because the people, like the people who are sitting behind you and you, are the folk who are going to make sure that this democracy, which so often we take for granted, so often we forget that this democracy allows us to be the people that we are and to do the things that we do, and allow us to be all that God meant for us to be. But it takes people with that high standard, those high standards, that no matter what happens, no matter where the wind may blow, no matter how difficult it may become, no matter how unpopular it may become. And that, by the way, that's where Comey made a mistake. Comey got so, this is my own personal opinion, he got so rattled by our Republican friends trying to get the 302s and all that kind. I think he buckled. That does not mean that he's not a good man. That means that he used poor judgment at that time. But again, the democracy is held together by us, by people, determining that and I'll close with this. I keep going back to something that Martin Luther King said, and I think about it all the time, when he talked about, and he was quoting another preacher, but he said, silence can become betrayal. Silence can become betrayal. When you see something wrong, you got to deal with it. And because if we don't, then we go down a slippery slope of betraying not only the people that we represent, all of us, and that includes, I'm just talking about all of us in government. Not only do we betray them, but we betray generations yet unborn. And so again, I thank you. And as to the FBI, Strzok and Page and the other folks, they did some damage. Ain't no doubt about it. No doubt about it. And I cannot get away from the excellent questions that the chairman asked. But I believe in my heart, and I want to listen to your answers very carefully, and how when you say that the problem originated with Comey's elevation, and he got off the track. I think the idea is that we have created a track through the practices of the DOJ that we created a road, and all he had to do is stay on track, and he would have been fine. He may have gotten battered a bit, but he would have been fine. And that's why the integrity issue becomes so significant. And so I'm just glad that we have people like you all who are able to come to the table, and yeah, you're going to catch some hell, probably. You already have. but you can stand no matter what. And you can say, we looked at it, we gave it our best. You may not agree with us, but we believe in our hearts that these are the right decisions, and I accept that. And with that, I thank you.
The gentleman yields back. The hearing record will remain open for 2 weeks for any member on either committee to submit written opening statement or questions for the record. I'll just say this quickly, Mr. Horowitz, it's been a long day. There are many important and many would argue, including me, urgent issues facing our country today. Some of them have been alluded to today. But there is nothing more important and nothing is ever more urgent than us having confidence in our justice system. So I will apologize to no one for having a hearing on your report, which takes a really hard look at some institutions we desperately need. And I'll say this as a compliment to you and your team. I was thinking over the weekend how much better off our country would be had you and your team conducted the investigation that is the subject of your report. And make no mistake, you and I probably would have reached some different conclusions, as old washed-up prosecutors do from time to time. You can look at a fact pattern and draw different conclusions. I don't mind if people are wrong. I really mind if they're unfair. We can survive being wrong. We can survive calling jump balls differently. We're not going to make it if our system is perceived as being biased and unfair. So, thank you for your work. I know it took a long time, but as you correctly noted, some of the information that my colleagues found most probative came towards the end. So it's a good thing that you did not succumb to all of our pressures and wrap this thing up before its natural chronology. And we wish you the same objectivity and fact centricity that you showed in this investigation with the others. Our country, I think, is counting on you and your team to do in your subsequent investigations exactly what you've done in this one, which is just call balls and strikes, and people are welcome to draw different conclusions, but they're not entitled to their own version of the facts. With that, to you and your team, thank you. We're adjourned.